The Defense Logistics Agency basically buys its medication for the U.S. military from the same commercial market that gets its raw materials from foreign and geographically concentrated sources. Ms. Raghavendran, how at risk is the United States, for example, if another pandemic or a major earthquake or flood or other natural disaster hits where these drugs are sourced?
Thank you, Chairman Peters, for that question, and also again for the opportunity to be here today. Our analysis suggests there is significant reliance on foreign sources when you look at finished dose forms and active pharmaceutical ingredients, and more for the latter than the former. There are some blind spots in this picture, though, which I will explain. When you examine facility and product registration counts, we see that the concentration is predominantly in India, lesser extent in Europe, and then followed by China. But what we have to keep in mind is that these are counts of facilities and product registrations. What it doesn't take into account is volume. So the volume could be concentrated in one facility among many, and we don't know that picture. Where we're flying completely blind is in our understanding of where the key raw chemicals that go into making the active ingredient come from. We have some anecdotal evidence, but we really have no systematic understanding.
Thank you. Dr. Fox, the Defense Department told my staff that with the exception of just 3 drugs, the DLA is not able to assess with certainty whether any of the other drugs it purchases rely solely on sources from either China or India. So given this blind spot, as was mentioned in the previous comments, what would happen to veterans, to military personnel, and to the U.S. healthcare system at large if these raw materials, including those sourced from China and India, simply became unavailable?
We would have significant shortages. And that's a little bit about what we have today, where our the DoD and our military are relying on the same commercial market as hospitals.
So the report that I released today, and Dr. Goodman referenced, finds that our lack of supply chain visibility is basically a national security risk, and it persists at a time when active shortages that we are seeing today are actually on the rise. The COVID-19 pandemic only exacerbated this problem. So Dr. Fox, the FDA created the Essential Medicines List in 2020, but in your testimony you note that this list should not be the starting point for determining which drug supply chains are most vulnerable because, I think, quote, it is not comprehensive for essential medical care, quoting your testimony today. Why is this so, and what should the federal government be doing differently?
Thank you for that question. You know, the government really needs to assess which products truly have a vulnerable supply chain. As my colleague mentioned, there may be very concentrated sources of key starting materials that it could look like we have a broad supply chain with maybe 5 to 6 manufacturers of something, but if each one of those companies is relying on a single key starting material that's only available in China or India, we simply don't know that. So we need to do more work to truly assess where the key vulnerabilities are. And FDA's essential medications list was not developed for that purpose. And in fact, it includes medications like filgrastim that have a very hardened manufacturing process where they could basically operate off the grid without any water, without any power, and they would still be producing filgrastim. And so we really need to target the true vulnerable products.
Dr. Schumann, we have data on drug shortages, but data on the impact of these shortages, especially on patient care, is unfortunately very, very limited. For example, a 2010 shortage resulted in pediatric Hodgkin's lymphoma patients receiving medication substitutions that unfortunately turned out to be less effective, as well as increasing complications for the delivery of that drug. If you could please, for the committee, describe the impact that you have seen from your work at the University of Michigan Medical School and what Congress should be aware of that isn't right now being captured by just looking at the data.
Thank you for that question, Senator. So you're absolutely right. One of the challenges of drug shortages is that it requires hospitals to essentially MacGyver different treatment opportunities and regimens, which is not necessarily evidence or data-based. So as an example, the Hodgkin's lymphoma drug was not available, and as a result, very well-meaning oncologists switched to a different chemotherapeutic drug. The analogy that I'll use is when you're baking, you have a list of ingredients, and you need that list to be exactly what it is in order to have an end product. When you make a substitution, and you don't necessarily know how well that is going to work, the problem is you're not going to end up with a dry cake, you're going to end up with a child whose cancer hasn't been cured. That is a prescient example of where we are and where we have been going. I can speak more about impact on VA and current at your discretion, sir.
Well, we'll do that, but just in my final question to you, as we look at these drug shortages, clearly it has a big impact on a major medical center like the University of Michigan, but talk to me about the impact to smaller, less resourced hospitals, which is the majority of hospitals out there around the country.
You're absolutely right, sir. The major issue here is the disparities that exist. At major institutions, we have more staff and resources in order to anticipate and mitigate shortages, to make sure that we have enough product, conserve it, obtain it from other sources. Smaller institutions simply don't have that. What that creates is situations in which smaller hospitals may not know what the supply may look like elsewhere. They may be making rationing decisions that are not necessarily consonant with national guidelines or with what hospitals down the street are doing. For example, when we are short on a medication at Michigan Medicine, I have absolutely no idea what that supply looks like or what the workflow looks like at hospitals across the state. That begets disparities, that treats people unfairly, whether that's poor people in Detroit or whether that's people in a rural hospital in northern Michigan. They are suffering in ways that we can't even necessarily know.
Thank you. Ranking Member Portman, or